Hey Book Dragons, welcome back to my channel. I've got a book review for you today. Let's go! So I recently finished reading Tress of the Emerald Sea by Sanderson. This is the first book of his secret projects, and it's a new Cosmere novel, and I'm really excited to talk with you more about it today. Make sure you like and subscribe, all that good stuff. Join my Discord if you want to talk more in depth about the book. I did have a read-along section for Tress of the Emerald Sea in my Discord, so if you're interested in chatting more with everybody on a more in-depth basis, you can do that there. I am going to break this review down into several sections. We're going to talk about the type of story, we'll talk about the setting, the characters, the magic system, the plot, things like that. I'll give you my pros and cons on it. And at the end, I'm going to try something new, and you'll have to let me know if this is something you're interested in. I'm going to give you some comparisons to other works that, if you like those works, you may enjoy Tress of the Emerald Sea. You'll have to let me know if that's something that works for you. I am going to have the chapters all set up for this, so if you're wanting to skip back and forth to different sections in the video, you can do that, okay? So let's go ahead and get started. Tress of the Emerald Sea is a whimsical, piratey fairy tale, and it is told in narrative style by Hoyd from the perspective of Tress. So there is a lot of storytelling personally from Hoyd, but when we are following Tress and getting her perspectives, it's Hoyd that is telling us her perspectives on her surroundings and the people she interacts with and things like that. And of course you do have dialogue directly from Tress and some of the other characters as well. So that is kind of how it's formatted, and it's a very interesting way of telling a story, and I thought it worked really, really well. The book introduces a new Cosmere world called Lumar, which is surrounded by 12 different seas made up of spores or particles that fall from the 12 different moons surrounding the planet. So it's a very unique setting. It's not your typical seafaring voyage type story, because the seas aren't really seas, they're just made up of these spores, and you do travel in the spore seas by boat, and there is an undercurrent of air or something like that that disrupts the spores to make it feel like you're traveling on a sea. So when that air current stops, as it intermittently does, you're just kind of stuck out in the middle of this sea waiting for the current to start up again. So it can be a little chaotic at times, and it's really a fascinating world that he's designed here. So now let's talk about some of the characters. Our main character, of course, is Tress. She lives in a place called the Rock, which is on the border of the Emerald Sea. And so that, of course, is where she gets her name, Tress of the Emerald Sea. There's also her friend Charlie, who is a noble boy who kind of likes to hide the fact that he's noble, because he likes being with the common people. He enjoys Tress's company, and she is just a window washer. She's a lowly servant, but he enjoys her company, and they have fun talking together, and she loves listening to Charlie's stories, and he just really enjoys her company and kind of wants to forget that he's the son of a nobleman. And what story would be complete without an evil sorceress? So you do have an evil sorceress that is kind of at heart the villain of this story, and very, very mysterious, and everybody's kind of afraid of her, and you'll find out more about the sorceress as you get later into the book. So I'm not going to go into too many details here. a big chunk of the story takes place on a ship, and so there's a bunch of characters that we need to talk about from the ship. There's Laggert, who is the cannon master. The assistant cannon master is Anne, but they never let her shoot the cannon because her aim is terrible. And there's Captain Crow, who is a very unique individual. She has a lot of mysterious abilities that make the crew afraid of her, and as a result, she's pretty much forced them into piracy when a lot of them did not want to be pirates. There's also a rat for an animal companion in the story, and his name is Huck. The ship does have its own doctor. His name is Dr. Ulam, or however they pronounce it. I'm not exactly quite sure, but he is a very different character. He's not necessarily human and not necessarily alive, and we'll just leave it at that. We also have Fort, who is the ship's cook, and he is also a trader. He loves to trade. Anything you want from him, he'll ask you, what do you have to trade for it? And he is also deaf. And I really like that we had the representation of a deaf person on the ship. I thought it brought a really unique perspective to the world. And then finally, we have the narrator, Hoyd, who is also a member of the ship's crew. He is just so much fun in this story. He is under a curse, and so every time you try to ask him a question, he just rattles off something weird and off the wall about tasting socks or figuring out what his toe tastes like. It's so much fun. It's hilarious. So now let's talk about the basic plot. As I mentioned before, Tress has grown up on the rock all of her life. The common people who live on the rock are not allowed to leave the rock because of the dangers of the open spore seas. Really, it becomes apparent that it's more to keep them in the dark and to try and keep control of them in many respects. But they are told that they are never to leave the rock. And the nobility can leave the rock. Everyone else cannot. And of course, Tress has grown up on the rock all of her life. She washes windows. She lives with her family. I think she's maybe 14, 15, something like that. And one of her only friends is Charlie, who happens to be a noble-born. At one point in the story, Charlie and his family do leave the rock because they are on a mission to find a bride for Charlie, because he is the heir to his father's name and station, and so he needs a good bride who is of noble birth, and they go on the journey, and Charlie never comes back. And it turns out that he has been given to the sorceress in order to maintain peaceful relations with the sorceress. And so Tress is so beside herself because Charlie is gone, and so she ends up stowing away on a boat to go across the many seas to rescue Charlie. It's just a really, really fun and interesting ride as she explores the world of Lumar on board these ships. So let's talk next about the magic system. The magic system isn't your typical Sanderson magic system. It involves manipulating spores to do different things. So each different type of spore, and of course, like I said before, there are 12 different types, will do different things if they are exposed to moisture. They might explode. They might create jagged spikes in the middle of the sea. They might create sentient monsters that are controlled and can take control of your mind and sap you of your energy while they are using up the water that's in you. Different types of spores do different things, and that's really what the magic system is all about. It is more of a magical world than it is an actual magic system that people need to have certain abilities to use. Anyone in this world pretty much can manipulate the spores. It's not something that you have to have special abilities to do, but people are so afraid of the spores that most people would never even attempt to get near them. So what makes Tress different is she is tenacious enough and she is willing to take risks to explore and see what she can do with the spores to help out her friends and to reach her goals. So really what makes her special is her tenacity and her drive to do whatever it takes to complete her goal, to get to her destination. That's very different than most Sanderson novels. Most Sanderson novels, you have people who are able to manipulate certain types of magic based on something that is innate in them. Other people in those worlds do not have those abilities. So it's kind of the haves versus the have-nots, whereas that's not really the case in this story. And I kind of like that. I thought it was cool that pretty much anyone has the potential to utilize the spores to do what they need to do. Now there are a few other types of magic. There is a little bit of light weaving and other types of magic that you see in other realms of the Cosmere. So if you've read other books in the Cosmere, you're going to recognize some of that. But it's very, very little. There's hardly any of that going on in this story. It's primarily the spores. So now let's talk about the prose. What did I like about the book? I found the characters to be very endearing. I really enjoyed getting to explore the different characters, get to know them, see some of their quirks, see the different sides to each character. They're not all necessarily good or bad. They're very gray characters in terms of their motivations and determination, and most of them very clearly edge toward more of a good-natured side than a deceitful side. I really enjoyed the way that the characters were designed and developed. I thought the humor in the book was really good, especially from Hoyd. Hoyd was just laugh out loud funny at times, and a lot of the other characters were as well. Huck the rat was quite funny as well. It has really unique world building, which I thought was just fascinating. You got to hand it to Sanderson. He creates worlds that you'll never see in any other book. I'm just constantly impressed with the way he designs his worlds. And you've got really high stakes, specifically with the surroundings. Traveling the spore seas are extremely treacherous, and you could easily die in any one of the spore seas, especially the Crimson Sea and the Midnight Sea. You're really taking your life into your own hands if you cross those. And they pretty much have to cross those to get to Tress's destination. So I thought the stakes were really high and very well thought out and plotted. As far as cons go, I really only have one. And that is some of the elements in the book felt very earthly familiar. There were times when I got to wondering, okay, so is Earth actually part of the Cosmere? Or is there an Earth-like planet that is part of the Cosmere? Or they just happen to have some of the same technology that we do, or similar names for things that we have? Like at some point, they talk about socks and slacks and colanders, and it's like, okay, that's totally Earth stuff. So that kind of took me out of the story a little bit. Not much, but it did a little bit, and I kind of got to wondering, okay, that was a little bit too familiar. Maybe there's something I'm missing here about the Cosmere. Maybe I'll find out later on down the road if there's a world in the Cosmere that is very highly technologically advanced, like Earth is, and has some of these same elements. So I'm curious to find out if that's the case, but that was kind of a con for me. So would you like this story? I think it's a very, very likable story, really easy to read, fun to read. it did remind me of other books and stories. Specifically, Tress's character in some ways reminded me of Ari from the Kingkiller Chronicles. If you've read those books by Patrick Rothfuss, you know who I'm talking about. She was also reminiscent to me of Letty Hempstock from Ocean at the End of the Lane. So I really enjoyed those aspects. There were certain things that felt very reminiscent of The Wizard of Oz, and also The Princess Bride. And The Princess Bride was actually a direct inspiration for Brandon Sanderson when writing this book. But he wanted to find a way to flip The Princess Bride on its head so that it was the girl who goes to rescue the guy. And he talked about how one thing that really bothered him about Buttercup in The Princess Bride was she didn't have a whole lot to do. She was just kind of there, your typical damsel in distress, and he wanted to flip that trope on its head and do something different. So I really appreciate that, and I can totally see it in this book. So if you like stories like I mentioned just now, you will probably like Tress and the Emerald Sea. If you like fairy tales, and if you like piratey stories, you will like Tress and the Emerald Sea. It is so much fun. I highly, highly recommend it. So let me know in the comments what you think. Is it something that you plan to read, or maybe you've read it already? I've seen a lot of people talking about how this would be a great entry point to the Cosmere, and I definitely think it would. A lot of people talk about how you should read Mistborn or some of his standalones like Warbreaker or Elantris. Those are great as well, but I think Tress is a great entry point. There's not really any spoilers for the Cosmere, although if you are a Cosmere veteran, there is plenty to be appreciated in this book in terms of Easter eggs. And I think that is everything. Make sure you guys are reading more books, and I will talk with you soon.